You've reached Hotel Pacifico, your 5-star destination for BC politicos. Press 4 for room service. Press the star key for your hosts Mike McDonald and Kate Hammer.
Welcome back, guests. It's good to see you, Mike.
Oh, I'm glad to be back. It's good to have a normal show today.
With
All
all
three
the
of us.
original 3 employees of Hotel Pacifico. The gang is back together.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Yeah, we'll see Geoff soon in the strategy suite. And today's guest is coming to us from the confluence of 2 of BC's mighty rivers, the Fraser and the Thompson. Canada's busiest trade corridor runs through her village, both CN and CPKC rail. Her village is the site of one of the oldest Indigenous settlements in North America. That would be Lytton, BC. As you may have heard, there was a fire. Denise O'Connor has been mayor of Lytton since 2022. She was elected a year after the fire destroyed her village and her family home. A retired school principal and lifelong Lytton resident, Denise stepped up to take on the leadership of Lytton at its most desperate time. Today, we're going to talk to her about rebuilding after the fire, how a tiny village contends with large layers of government showing up and trying to help. Welcome to Hotel Pacifico, Denise.
Thank you, Kate.
Can you take us back then to the day of the fire? Let's go back in time, June 30th, 2021. This is you're a resident of Linton at that time. What were you doing that day?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it was, of course, the temperature was just starting to drop after the heat dome. It was, I can't remember, 45 degrees instead of 49 degrees, something like that. And I had been at a meeting at the visitor center just down the street from where I lived. I volunteered there. And I came home, put my laptop bag down by the door and walked in. And I saw on Facebook that there was a fire at the south end of town. And of course, my home is kind of at the northern end of town. So I didn't believe it because I'd just come in from outside. So I went out to look down the street, and yeah, it was, I don't even know how to describe it, a monster of a fire, black smoke, buildings were on fire, and the smoke and the embers, blowing our way. So that's how I became aware of the fire. I'd seen it on Facebook. We were inside, the curtains drawn, trying to keep cool inside, just like everybody else in the community. Nobody knew what was happening outside.
Yeah. And I hear a lot of people actually heard through Facebook. That was a major connector for folks who maybe were sitting inside trying to beat the heat, scrolling or checking things out. Yeah.
And the village was basically consumed within about an hour, right? It was fast, right?
Oh, very fast. Yeah. I've heard 20 minutes, but probably an hour for sure. There were, when I went outside on the street, I could hear horns honking, people on the main street, warning people of the fire. And then, of course, people running around knocking on neighbors' doors as well. I mean, I didn't see that. I heard that later, but people were getting into their cars and starting to we just knew we had to leave.
Is that what you did? Like, how did you get to safety?
Yeah, my husband, he was reading on the deck. Mike would know what that looks like, on the north side of the house in the shade. And I went, and of course, he didn't know what was happening. And I said, come on, you've got to get down here. We've got to go. And he was in a wheelchair at the time. So yeah, quickly I got the wheelchair into the car, got him in the car. I was able to run back in and grab a couple of things, but literally, I remember standing in my kitchen, going, what else should I grab? What else should I take? And it was like, I couldn't even think what. And got in the car, and we headed north, toward Kamloops is where we ended up that night. Yeah.
And the fire followed you from behind, as I recall, because it swept right through the adjacent Lytton First Nation reserve.
Yeah. So we stopped at Jade Springs is where we stopped. at first, along with many others at the parking lot, which is about 2 kilometers north of the village. And I was texting with my brother, and he said, what's happening in town? He lived up above town. And of course, he was south of the fire, so didn't realize what was happening. And then, of course, cell service went out, power went out, and we kept going, and ended up in Spence's Bridge, where we spent probably a couple hours there, wondering what to do. But the Cook's Ferry Band provided water for us and washrooms. They opened their hall. And then, the fire was coming. It was like Spence's Bridge was getting concerned. So, yeah, we ended up on our way to Kamloops that night.
So
Go ahead. Go ahead, Kate.
No, I was going to say, following that, when is it that you become aware of the scale and the scope of the fire?
I remember sitting at Jade Springs, just after we'd evacuated, and looking back at the atomic bomb looking smoke above the hill. We couldn't see town, but the town was just on the other side of the hill. I just knew. I knew in my heart. I knew in my mind that was it. But it really wasn't, of course, until we saw the media the next day. Yeah.
And you knew at that point your home was gone.
Yeah. I looking at that, as I said, it was like an atomic bomb cloud of smoke. What could be left? Yeah, it was.
You grew up in Lytton.
I did.
And forest fires were a way of life for you growing up. Obviously, this was the most catastrophic, but I mean, how is this? Obviously, there must be an impact. The fires had an impact on you, obviously, but how do you see it now? Like, having gone, like it's not a new thing, but it's become a bigger thing.
Yeah.
Has it changed the way you look at wildfires now?
Yeah, growing up, of course, my brothers and my dad fought fire every summer. I think it was 1970, we had to evacuate from this house I'm in right now, actually. We had to evacuate because there was a forest fire coming. But, in those days, the fires seemed to be out in the forest, not, near civilization or near a community like this. And it's just, I never ever dreamed it would happen. And so it just made it so real, and that, anything can happen. Who was prepared for this? Nobody. Nobody.
Yeah. I'm so sorry, Denise. I just want to say, to lose your home, I can only imagine. And I'm grateful to you to be able to talk to us about it, and to hear your story. Catch us up a bit then, because, here we are 3 years later. I know it was 42 degrees yesterday in Lytton or thereabouts. If we were to fly a drone over the site of Lytton right now, what would we see?
So over the village, you would see a lot of lots that are just flat gravel because they've been cleaned up and backfilled. But you'd also see, I think there's 6 houses under construction, and then the Chinese Museum. 3 of those houses are at lockup. The insides are one of them actually is complete, has had its final inspection. The people can move in anytime. And then you'll see a number of properties where there's excavation happening for foundations to be put in. Yeah, lots of construction, lots of machines, people. Yeah.
A lot of property owners in Lytton were uninsured. And why is that? Why do so many people not carry insurance?
Yeah, that's a good question. Lots of people asked that after the fire, because I think it was 40% did have insurance, is what I'd heard. Growing up, I remember when I left home to get my first rental, my first teaching job, my parents said to me, you make sure you get, contents insurance. It's something that I grew up it was just what you did. You got insurance for your house. So there'd be a lot of families that's the way it was. For some, maybe not so. There's no place to buy insurance here in Lytton. You have to travel out like so many other small communities. That could be a factor. I don't know why, but I think there's multiple factors why people didn't have insurance. Maybe it's the money too. Maybe it's the affordability. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So who are those folks who's, that you said there are about 6 or 7 under construction now? Who are those folks? Which homes are those?
So 5 of the houses that are rebuilding, and the others that have foundations being dug, are all rebuilding through insurance. There's one home, and in fact, it's the house that just had its final inspection, was built by the Mennonite Disaster Services, who came in to support a family that did not have insurance. Mind you, with that program, they come in with the expertise and the labor. The property owner has to provide the materials, which is a huge help for people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So one of the practical things which we've touched on in this show before is the impact of the archaeological cost on people seeking to rebuild, and you're going through that yourself. And just to, I guess, put it into context, and Lytton is the site of an ancient civilization, and and First Nations been there since time immemorial. So the village, I'm not sure when the village was designated an archaeological site of interest, but was that before the fire that it was had that designation?
We're not either. We don't know when.
Okay.
But after the fire, we discovered that. I mean, it's not a designated site, but because it was inhabited by First Nations, I think it's prior to 1846 is what the heritage branch looks at. It's a heritage small letter, not capital letter, heritage site, and so archaeology requirements were put in place. Never before, as far as we know. But yeah, so there was archaeological monitoring during the removal of the debris, during the removal of the foundations, during the removal of contaminated soil, during the refill of the backfill coming in. And now that the properties are turned back over to the homeowners to start rebuilding, for most properties, not all, but most, there is archaeological monitoring required as well.
Do you know, has any items of significance been found through all those processes of inspection so far?
We heard there's been 7,000 items found during the work, the remediation work.
Right. Okay.
I haven't heard any with the property owners right now. There could be, but I haven't heard of any. I know on my property, they've started the sifting of the native soil that they've dug up, because I'm putting my basement back in my house. And I understand they haven't found anything of significance.
So if I'd been building a house before the fire, say in 2020 or 2019, on a vacant lot, I wouldn't have had to deal with that requirement.
Yeah. My understanding is that it was a chance find process, which is everywhere in BC. If you find something, you have to report it.
Right.
That's what it was.
But there was no blanket rule before the fire, but now there is, or at least for specific sites.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's on the basis that there was occupation, like Indigenous populations there did you say 1867, or is it?
1846 is the
1846.
So the cost of the homeowner, sorry.
And we know that it's been inhabited by First Nations for thousands of years, right? That's not an argument. And I don't know of any people from Lytton that would argue that, right? But it's never been a requirement as far as we know to.
The upshot for homeowners is the cost to have archaeological monitoring on site, and it can be anywhere from like 25 to 1,000 or more to add on to the cost of the rebuild, right? And that's not insured.
That's right. There's no insurance for that. Yeah. So the process is, my understanding, the process is that after you get your building permit approved, you have to then hire an archaeologist who then does a work plan for the archaeology work, which costs money. And then that work plan, once it's approved, then they put that into place, and that's the archaeology work. For my property, I received a quote for the work at $45,000. Now, saying that, other people have had high quotes like that, and it's come out, $10,000 less than that, their actual invoice. So mine's yet, I haven't received my invoice. We'll see what it is. Yeah, that if it's $45,000, it's coming out of my own pocket. There is no support, no insurance coverage. Yeah.
So help me. Go ahead. $45,000.
Which is huge. For the people, they don't have savings to build a house, let alone pay for that. There's been one fellow that has actually, because of hearing that quote, has made the decision not to return. He's canceled his building permit and canceled his contractor to rebuild. So
what's your, like, what is the future of Linton? Right? I'll leave it at that. Like, yeah.
So if, I don't know if Kate, if you ever had the pleasure of visiting Lytton before the fire, but it as a very small village, but a service hub for 2,000 to 3,000 people around the area. 5 or 6 First Nation bands, rural properties. They used Lytton as their, grocery store, post office, bank, doctor. All of the services were located in the village. And so really, to me, that's the future again. We have to build that back so it becomes a service hub again. The people outside of the village consider Lytton their town, their village. Everyone I talk to, they want that town back. So, yeah.
Well, and I guess what stands in the way of that happening? And I want to name 2 things we sort of touched on here. Like, one is sort of the people who are going to have to probably love Lytton and want to come back, but might have to make decisions based on finances, right? That they can't come back. And I think the other one is just the time it is going to take for sort of that critical mass of everything to sort of come back, and Lytton to be a place where you can live and it can be a hub again for services.
Yeah. And that's something I've learned as coming into this role of mayor, is things do not move quickly at all. So it is going to take time. It is going to take time. But, in the meantime, we're working with Interior Health around the rebuild of the medical center that is going on. We're having conversations with the bank. Scotiabank is looking for that permanent location, and they may have found one. They're not announcing it, but hopefully they have. We've received Infrastructure Canada grant money. Well, we haven't received the money. We're in the process of applying for it, but it was committed 2 years ago through the federal government to build some municipal structures, buildings, things like our museum, visitor center, swimming pool, those kinds of things that are public, inclusive buildings. So we're working with that. So we've got a number of irons in the fire right now, but it's not going to be quick. Yeah.
Well, specifically, your healthcare center, which had only been built in the last 15 or 20 years, it burnt down to the ground in the fire. Miraculously, everyone got out. In fact, it's a miracle there's so little loss of life in that fire overall. But the hospital burned to the ground. We're 3 years later.
Yeah, medical center, assisted living. I know, and they're just starting the process now to first of all, they have to determine this service level, and we've been very clear from not just the village but the surrounding area that we want what we had before, which was urgent and primary care, lab service, x-ray service, and assisted living. But they're just confirming the level of service before they go to the province, I guess, for the funding to rebuild.
So it's not like the day after the fire they said, hey, we're going to get in there and rebuild this thing right away to support your community. And we're 3 years later still at that point.
Yeah, we've heard it fairly recently. And again, that's just an example of the slowness. And I don't know why. I don't understand it. But again, I heard at a meeting yesterday that, yes, they are going to be rebuilding on the same location in town. So,
okay.
So you have one of the, like, I'm thinking of, became mayor about a year after the fire. And I'm listening to you talk, and you do not fit, the work you're doing is not the typical work of a small town mayor. Like, you are taking on a very different job. And so let's back up to, and I want to understand a little bit of why you decided to become the mayor. This was about a year after the fire. Why you stepped up to this?
Yeah, a year and a half later. Sometimes I don't know. You know, I was displaced after the fire. I was homeless, and the house I'm in right now is the home I grew up in Lytton. It didn't burn, and I was offered to it by my siblings to have a place to live. And so I decided in November after the fire to return here. So I was back in the community. There are still, you know, hundreds, thousands of people living around the area. There's still 30 or 40 homes in Lytton that did not burn that are in the village. And I was very vocal. I was very, you know, I was on every council meeting speaking up. I was writing letters to the province. I was doing all sorts of things. And it's the people around the area here that said, Denise, why don't you run for mayor? And I said, no, I have no interest in that at all. And then election time came around, the previous mayor and council, you know, nobody was running. They weren't running. And I woke up one morning and thought, why not? I'm here. I'm involved. Let's see if I can make a difference. So that's how I became involved. And then the other four councillors were all same kind of situation. Two of them live in rural properties across the river. They're not even, you know, they're not from the village here, but they ran and are in. So the five of us, we're the only all-female council in the province. Whether that's good or bad, I don't know. But I think there's only ever been one. There's only ever been one years ago, apparently. So, you know, one of the first things, though, getting in and trying to figure out, first of all, what does a mayor do?
Yeah.
I'm still not sure because we have to still follow the community charter and the local government act and do all those things that a municipality does, as well as recover and rebuild. So one of the first things we recognized was that we needed to surround ourselves with staff that will do the job that we need doing. And so it was in January, February, I believe, after we'd been in a few months, that we did some rearranging and we brought on staff. So we've had consistent staff now for the last year and a half that wasn't there after the fire for that first year and a half. So we've had CAO, CFO, recovery managers, and all the needed staff in place right now. So that's been huge.
So the work you're doing is quite rare, though. Like the work you're doing is rebuilding a small town, rebuilding a community. And I'm wondering, because I think for a lot of people following the story of Linton, they're going to say, they'll know, you know, that the fire was awful. And I think for a while there, the world's attention was on Linton. And I think a lot of people would have awareness that there has been federal money that's been pledged to help rebuild, that there has been provincial money that's been pledged to rebuild, and maybe some awareness of some of the bureaucracy that slowed you down, right? And the difficulty with insurance and with the archaeological digs. But can you imagine that person listening to you right now? Can you explain to them, why is this so hard to do? Why is it so hard to rebuild Lytton?
You know, we lost absolutely everything. Not only all of those services, we lost all of our corporate records, all of our financial records. We've literally had to rebuild not only physically the buildings, you know, but rebuild the corporate infrastructure as well. So that is something that I don't think people realize the extent. There has been disasters in many other communities around, but they haven't lost everything like we have. The province's model for recovery is community-led. And I think that's been one of the huge issues, is that how can, first of all, a tiny community who has lost absolutely everything be expected to lead a recovery? I don't think any rural property or any rural community our size or even a little bigger has the capacity at the best of times to lead a recovery, let alone once we've lost everything. So
what do you think is the most important thing that could be change you'd make going back benefit of hindsight, if a town, God forbid, had to go through this again somewhere
Yeah.
else in BC, would it be
So,
a
so I think,
designated point person, or
yeah,
someone who could get things done, cut through the red tape on your behalf, or what do you think?
yeah, I think the province tried to put people in to advise and help the council at the time. Um, but no, I think it's got to be somebody to come in and make those decisions, know what has to be done, and get things moving and going. And whether it's a point person, well, probably should be a point person, or a small team, and maybe not dismiss a mayor and council altogether. But my goodness, the council at the time, at least two of them lost their homes, and they're expected to, carry on. Yeah, they have to look at each disaster, I think, individually, and then heaven help if another community ever goes through this again, to lose absolutely everything. But yeah, to send somebody in to make those decisions, to say this is what needs to get done.
So for the record, in principle, the idea of a community-led rebuilding is something you support, right? It's that in this case.
That's right. I do. Yeah, I do support it. But I don't think it's a one size fits all. It shouldn't be a one size fits all. Yeah.
So what's top on your priority list right now? Like, what are the top 2 or 3 things that you're most focused on
Oh my goodness.
for the year ahead? So what are the ones that stand out for you?
Yeah. So water, sewer, where we are still working on those. We've got substantial grants to do that work. It's not that the fire damaged the sewer and the water lines there, but we have the opportunity now to fix the issues that were there before. So we are working on that. Definitely our emergency management. We've hired an emergency management coordinator who's helping us not only with things like emergency planning and EOC development, but also to get our volunteer fire department functioning properly again. We have a committed group of people on volunteer fire department. We're up to 15 people now, which is huge for our area. Many young people are joining, which is, to me, surprising considering what we've been through. But we're going, we need to get that fire hall rebuilt. So we're working on that, as well as all the training and paperwork and policies around the fire department. So fire hall, permanent village office, we are working on that. We have a temporary one set up locally here, but we're in the process right now of planning for a permanent facility. And then accessing the $64 million Infrastructure Canada grant that the federal government announced 2 years ago to build those community services buildings. So those are probably our main priorities right now. Ongoing is our bylaws. We're still developing those and bringing them in as needed. I think about a community, a typical community where bylaws would be updated or brought in as needed, but ours are just ongoing. There's just so much work to do.
I'm interested to know what role the advocacy of your MLA and MP have played. How have they been supportive, or what kind of role have they played in terms of your efforts in the village?
They've been incredible advocates for us. I know Brad Viss is our MP, and he has spoken out in the Parliament in Ottawa numerous times for Lytton, helping us get the post office reestablished here. There's not, because a municipality is a provincial jurisdiction, not a federal jurisdiction. There's only so much he can do, but he has been, very outspoken in support of getting Lytton going. Jackie Taggart is our MLA for the area, and her as well in Victoria has been spoken out loud and clear on many, many occasions to supporting Lytton.
Do you ever wonder if you have an opposition MP and an opposition MLA?
We
do you ever
sure
wonder
yeah.
would it have made a difference if you had government representative?
Yeah, I don't know, because who knows, but I do wonder that sometimes, right?
Mm.
Yeah, we have both opposition, MLA and MP. So, hindsight is 2020. I don't know, but
And tell me too, Prime Minister Trudeau, I know, made a comment at a climate summit that there was a town called Linton. How did that feel for residents to hear?
He said that too soon after the fire, that there was a town, because a town and a village is the people. It really is the people, especially a small community like that. And for him to say there was a town, it struck a chord with so many of us, and not happy at all. Lots of letters were written, and yeah, he's never responded to any of them, of course. I don't know that he's ever been here to visit Lytton at all. In his many trips to BC, he's never come to Lytton.
Now, Lytton's a bit unique in BC. I can think of other places like Hazelton, perhaps, that have a probably majority First Nations population in that service center area, right?
Yeah.
That use the village. So what's the relationship like between the village and the Lytton First Nation and those 5 other nations that you mentioned earlier? Is it do you do things together, or is it doing things on your own and just try to coordinate, or how do you characterize that?
Yeah, you're right. And I look at the property owners in the village, well over 50% are First Nation that, are part of the village. But I think one of the challenges has been as I said, the jurisdictions, federal jurisdiction, provincial jurisdiction. And so, there's lots of things that happen. The First Nation, Lytton First Nation is who was directly impacted by the fire, of course. And a lot of things they're doing with their rebuilding and such is all through federal, whereas for us, it is provincial. Relationship as a community of people, we're incredibly integrated. I think of Lytton First Nation was able to build a temporary hall, for example, and everybody from the village has been invited to go. We go to their Christmas parties, they go to their dinners. Very, very integrated, very, very welcoming, and vice versa as well. Events that we put on. We just had our June 30th event a couple of weeks ago, and it was just wonderful to see the number of people from out on the reserves and out in the other bands come and join us. And as one, we had that event. Lytton First Nation shares some of our water and sewer. And so we're, as a village, we're working on projects together like that. Yeah, it's challenging. It's not simple or easy. I'd like to say it's all perfect, and it's not. But we are working on it. Yeah.
So I was on vacation last week. I missed the recording, the episode last week, but I was being productive in that I went by a bookstore and picked up a book called Lytton, which I wasn't aware it was on the shelves. And for those listeners who probably haven't seen it yet, it's a book published by Penguin and Random House, so a pretty big publisher in Canada, maybe the largest. And it's written by a former Toronto Star reporter who grew up in Lytton, and Kevin Loring, who's a NCATMA member, and I believe he's the Indigenous playwright in residence at the National Arts Center
in Ottawa.
Yeah, he's a playwright and actor, impressive guy. And so I've read it, and I thought it wasn't what I expected. It was interesting in that the entire book is about everything but the fire. There's a little bit of spoiler alert, geez, but but there's a bit about the fire, obviously at towards the end. But it tells the tale of Lytton going back in time, but in a way that is very personal.
Yeah, that's
I know you're plowing through it yourself, but how's that book make you feel? Like and generally the attention that Lytton's been getting, unfortunately, because of the fire, but there is a lot of positive attention too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Kevin grew up in Lytton, and Peter I didn't know him well, but he lived here his family lived here in the 60s. And it's really neat that the two of them got together to write this book. It tells the tale of Lytton starting right from the very beginning, pre-contact, right? And many of the stories that I've been reading, I've heard before. I grew up listening to the adults talk about these things that have happened, and the different family names from the 60s and 70s and that sort of thing. So I find it pretty fascinating to read through. I'm not at the end yet, so I'm not sure how it ends. But yeah, it's a really interesting book, I think, for anybody with any connection to the Fraser Canyon, Lytton. It's not only about Lytton. They talk about Ashcroft, Boston Bar, like the whole area as well, right? Different stories, things that have happened. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so, yeah, there it is, another book selection from Hotel Pacifico. Check it out,
Yeah.
folks. But
From the hotel library. Yeah.
yeah.
I ordered mine from Amazon, but I hear it's in all sorts of bookstores all over the place. So
Yeah. Well, Your Worship, it's been a great pleasure to have you come by the Hotel Pacifico. And we appreciate the update on Lytton. I mean, as you know, it doesn't take much for me to get Lytton into the storyline usually. I'm always looking for ways to help to talk about the Fraser Canyon due to my addiction issues of just everything about the Fraser Canyon I'm interested in. But I learned a lot listening to you today, how you're discharging your duties and trying to move things forward.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate that. I think I've always said we need to keep Lytton out there. We need to keep the story out there, and we also need to keep looking forward.
Guess, if I asked you what percentage of Canadian homes are connected to high-speed internet, what would you guess? I'll give you a hint. 10 years ago in 2014, it was 79%. Obviously, it's gone up. And today, 93.5% of Canadian homes are connected to high-speed internet. And can you guess how BC compares to the rest of the country? Thanks in part to hometown team TELUS, British Columbians are ahead of the national connectivity curve, with 95.2% of homes having high-speed access, which is great, but we need more. If you're a regular listener, you've heard me explain the critical role high-speed internet plays in supporting businesses and keeping residents safe and connected, particularly in smaller and more remote communities. That's why presenting sponsor TELUS is partnering with the federal and provincial governments to help us get to 100%. Because fairness for every generation means making sure everyone in Canada has access to reliable and affordable high-speed internet, no matter where they live. This past June, Minister of Rural Economic Development and Minister responsible for the Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency, Goody Hutchings, together with BC Minister of Citizen Services George Chow, announced over $37 million in federal and provincial funding for 2 projects by TELUS to bring high-speed internet access to more than 1,900 households, including 54 Indigenous households in central British Columbia. And that's what it means to be BC's hometown team.
Hello. You've reached the Hotel Pacifico Strategy Suite.
The gang is all back. Good to see you, Geoff.
Good to see you, Mike. Feeling better?
Gang is back together. Here we go.
We had a lot of fun with some guests back in the strategy suite. Stephen, Andrea, James, they all took good care.
And Sarah.
And Sarah Sadu. Yeah. But we're glad to see you again, Geoff.
Yeah. Well, I think this is my second time.
Yes, but first with the 3 of us.
That's
first
right.
with the original
Okay, yeah.
trio. Did you get to listen in on just how much Mayor O'Connor is doing in Lytton? I think for the grand salary of $7,500.
Yeah, it's a really it's a tribute to her, of course. And I thought it was a really interesting interview. But it was a unprecedented disaster. But I think her comments are fair criticisms of the response that occurred. I was there in the government at the time, and I think people really underestimated it, were taken by surprise, and unfortunately the communities paid quite a high price for that.
It's pretty amazing, not necessarily in every case, but in a lot of these rural areas, how hard community leaders work to sustain their communities, and there's no tax base to pay them what they're actually putting into it. So it's a volunteer job.
Well, another one whose name escapes me because I would have to look it up, but the Mayor of Merritt has really been stalwart as well through the floods, and trying to get the resiliency money and then being left out by federal funding. And these communities build up a certain way, pretty much the way people just do it. It's a do-it-yourself proposition, and then someone comes along and says, "Actually, you're not up to best practices, and that'll cost $1 billion." And then a flood comes, and it can get pretty daunting.
Mayor of Princeton comes to mind too. During the floods, there's a lot of great examples of community leaders around the province that have to step up when the moment strikes.
Well, the Princeton guy is interesting too, because he was, I think, understandably critical of senior levels of government. And there's always a tendency or a fear that, if you're critical, then there's going to be repercussions. We see that unfolding now in the Fraser Valley, where Abbotsford, people are still thinking through the whole Abbotsford flood. And Henry Brown was the mayor there. He did a great job at the time. He's no longer in office, but new people are coming and trying to figure out what to do next. And it's very complicated.
And you had mentioned the mayor of Fort Nelson in a previous show as well. So there's the examples abound. Hopefully there's not too many more examples this year in the fire season.
Yeah,
hopefully we don't hear anything about these guys. We don't want to hear any good news about mayors stepping up in
let them do the traditional business.
Sleepy Hollow is fine. Yeah.
Yes. Well, on the topic of gratitude for service, I think it was over the weekend we heard that former Vancouver East NDP MLA and Minister of Everything, Bob Williams, passed away. Geoff, you probably would have known Bob Williams.
I
really
got to know. I was lucky enough to get to know Bob quite well, and he had a very long career, and many of our listeners may have missed it, because he really went into retirement quite a while ago. He died at the age of 91. But as quite a young man, he became a city councillor, an alderman, as they said in those days in Vancouver. It was a huge thorn in the side of the administration at that time. Went into provincial politics. He was trained as a planner, and became a critical player in the Dave Barrett government. And he's, I think, been given credit for almost everything the Barrett government did over the last 48 hours. And certainly he had his hand in a lot of it. But I think in some respects, his contribution there was an intangible one, not so much a visible one. The visible one I'd point to is that he stopped what was a plan for a huge black tower for the heart of the city of Vancouver, and made sure that Arthur Erickson was hired and the whole building was redesigned in a matter of a couple of years. Bing Tom, another very important international architect from BC, was working on that project too. And they created Robson Square and redefined the heart of Vancouver in a fundamentally different way. And we've got a lot to talk about today, so I'll just stop here. But he was the thinker and doer of the government. And if the ALR legislation got into trouble, he would come in and fix it. And he could pretty rough when he thought you were making a mistake. So he had people who didn't appreciate his advice all the time. But there were many aspects of the government and his drive that he could take credit for. He was certainly Barrett's right arm in many, many respects. Then he went on later in life to be a key leader at Van City Savings, and got involved in leadership and made it a critical institution in the province as well. And a third important institution was the Railway Club, which he owned for a while, and was a very important watering hole in BC for many, many years. Not particularly political, but huge for local music and just a great place downtown.
Which I think is closed again, right?
It is, yeah. It wound up being bought by the Donnelly Group or something. But the interesting thing about that site is that the building is on top of some critical underground infrastructure. I can't remember what it is. It may be the tunnel from the old post office now, this huge new development down to the railway. Anyway, they can't put a tower there because there's something underneath. So the Railway Club is stuck where it is, and hopefully it gets reopened.
Well, let's get the Railway Club reopened. But we talked about it during the Keith Baldry episode last December, but Bob Williams had a biography published last year with
Power Well.
Using
Power Well. But also, Geoff, your book with Rod Mickleborough was the definitive account of the Barrett years. Can you remind me of the title of the book again?
The Art of the Impossible.
Okay.
There's a great anecdote, then I think we should move on, but they considered themselves underdogs, and the underdog message of their campaign in 72 was so strong that no one was allowed to talk about the possibility of taking power. Therefore, there was no transition plan. And the night after the victory party, Williams met Barrett downtown, and they walked from wherever they were to the only cafe, which in those days was right by what's now called Pigeon Park. famous little oyster place in downtown East Side. And Williams had written a whole bunch of transition ideas on the back of an envelope, literally, and he and Barrett sat down and had chowder and talked it through. A very interesting story, which both of them told us during the research.
There you go.
Yeah,
Oh,
no
fantastic.
consultation. The stuff they got done in 3 years could not happen anymore.
Yeah.
Sounds like good advice for John Rustad. Don't talk about governing. But we'll get to that. In the meantime, speaking of old NDPers, there seems to be a few flying the coop in the past week. Bruce
Well, I think
Ralston,
veteran's a
Harry
better term
Baines.
than old, but yes, they are going.
Well, two
We'll
out
call
of
it
three.
relative. We'll call it relative.
2 out of 3 are
They
in their
all-
70s, so
Exactly,
that's 70 years
exactly.
young.
And another in his
Uh,
50s, like, and all held their seats since 2005,
Yeah,
That's right.
right?
They're
Right. And
all-
including Harry, yeah.
yeah,
yeah.
and two in sort of you know, we'll call them swing ridings in Surrey, 2 kind of key Surrey seats.
Well, if they became swing ridings, that would be noteworthy. I think Ralston and Baines have not been in the swing category for a while. However,
How much is it?
We can
Yeah.
get into the ridings a little bit later, because
But-
I think there are some interesting points about Surrey happening. We should just mention the third guy, Rob Fleming,
Yeah.
who
Victoria.
specifically
Victoria
as
Swan
well,
Hill.
Yeah.
who
Yeah.
seems to have been in politics forever, even before 2005, because he was on city council and he was a
Correct,
student
yeah.
student politician at UVic back in the day. But what strikes me with these three, and Geoff, you'll probably caution me for overplaying this, but they all seem to me to have been from the labor / moderate side of the NDP, and maybe economically focused compared to some others. It may be very aligned with kind of a Horgan style of politics. I mean, is that a fair comment?
Well, it is, but I don't think that's the significance of this. I think I hadn't thought about the political weight of it, but it's a very human situation for people to say, you know what, I'm feeling great. We see this south of the border. Why wouldn't I continue? I'm loving my work. There's more to do, and so on and so forth. But at a certain point, and it came late for these three, particularly the ones who are in the older range, because of course I know all of them very well, and it's very tempting to say, well, I'd like to stay another 4 years. I'm in great shape. I can provide leadership and so on, but it's 4 years, and finally, when you have to sign those nomination papers and put them in, I think reality hits home, and people decide differently from what they may have said even 3 or 4 weeks ago. I mean, Harry Baines pointed to a death in his near family that kind of woke him up and his wife, and they had a conversation, a heart-to-heart, and he's stepping back. Bruce also had said repeatedly, Bruce Ralston, that he was going to run again.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of talented people who can step into their shoes. More surprising was Rob Fleming, although he's been there a long time. He's been there a long time. And I think anyone sitting down and saying to yourself and to your supporters and to your family, I'm going to sign this nomination paper right now, it just obviously hit him. But we'll see who steps into the shoes in each of those cases. That's the really interesting point,
Geoff, do
is
you
how
think,
developed their succession was.
Do you think any of these three esteemed gentlemen qualify for my recruitment campaign to get a senator
Senate?
from British Columbia? Do you
Ah.
think? Do you nominate any of those three for for senator of
No, I
British
would never
Columbia?
nominate anyone for senator, and I'm not a fan of the Senate. So, and I say that with all due respect to my old friend Larry Campbell. But no, I don't think we had any Senate material there. And,
Well, I
and
think
so
Rob
it
Fleming's
would be
too
very
young.
short-term appointment. Yeah.
Rob Fleming's
Ro-
not too. Stop it. Stop it.
He's-
Well,
he's
Ralston and Baines are
52.
too old.
Well, Rob Fleming,
Oh.
like 23 years in the Senate. That's I
Okay,
can't accept,
oh,
I
for
can't accept that.
sure. But I think also the kind of like the maximum service up to 75 doesn't mean we can only nominate people over 65. Like, or I don't know
We
what.
don't know, but on the wage front, on the age front, that's one thing. We're going to get to Andrew Weaver in a minute, but I don't think it changes. We'll see who comes in. These are going to be very desirable seats to take if you're a nominee. But what I think it shows is that we're seeing a changing of the guard, and to pick up the thread from Bob Williams passing, he is, as far as I can determine, with the possible exception of Alfred Nunweiler, who was a minister of that portfolio at the end of the Barrett government. He was the last surviving member of the Barrett cabinet. The only two Barrett government caucus members who I think are still with us are Colin Gableman and Harold Steeves. Interestingly, both of them voted against the government at one point. So that obviously didn't affect their life expectancy.
Longevity.
Maybe political expectancies. And we've seen that also now with the Horgan government. The number of people from 2005, which was the recovery year for the NDP, is I think down to Mike Farnworth, who missed a year, of course, but dates back to the Glenn Clark time. So this is a new generation coming in, and diverse and pretty strong. And there's already a pretty hefty group of experienced cabinet ministers there for Premier Eby to consider if he's successful.
Okay. Well, it'll be interesting to see who steps into those races. Let's move now. We have a clipping this week. And our clipping this week is actually Vaughn Palmer in the Vancouver Sun, writing about some comments actually that former Green leader Andrew Weaver made regarding Premier David Eby. He predicted John Rustad's Conservatives were going to win the upcoming election and blamed it on the fact that Premier David Eby is a, quote, know-it-all elitist who has, quote, lost touch with the average person. Are these comments, Geoff, at all surprising from Andrew Weaver?
Well, you should never be surprised that Andrew Weaver wants to make a comment. So I don't know how I could be,
he's pretty grumpy generally.
He is grumpy, and I listened to the context of some of these reports that he's bringing from the electoral front, and they mostly involve, legitimate conversations. Not that there would be illegitimate ones, but conversations he has with people on the street, in the doctor's office, and so on. And I wouldn't disagree with him that that's a mood out there that is something the government has to pay a lot of attention to. People are focused on what's happening in their personal lives. Are they able to afford what they need? Can they get to the doctor in time? Do they even have a doctor? Those are questions. But to jump from that to character assessment of the premier and link that to three people who had excellent reasons for deciding not to run again struck me as two jumps too far. And I don't put much weight on it. I don't know why he would have any direct or even secondhand information about David Eby's leadership styles to be able to link it to those guys.
I don't think he was very charitable to Adam Olsen either, frankly, for kind of projecting what he thought were Adam Olsen's reasons for not running. I thought Adam Olsen.
Well, I hope we're expecting to have
sincere.
Adam as a guest, so we can ask Adam and consider how Sonia Furstenau may feel about Andrew Weaver's leadership qualities. I mean, it's a harsh world. He's in a glass house right now. I think he should be careful.
Yeah.
Well, why?
I mean, it's just interesting, just in terms of you had Weaver's been like a yo-yo over the years. He was very anti-Horgan, and then they had the great reconciliation at the rugby game, and then continues to be, president of the John Horgan fan club. But he once endorsed the BC Liberals, and blah 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 blah. So does it matter? Maybe not. Other than he's got a soapbox with the media from time to time, but it at least shows that there's not unanimity behind the NDP these days. Not that Andrew Weaver specifically an NDP.
Well, yeah, but
and
go ahead, Kate.
I was going to say the liability that he's naming. I think maybe with a bit more old grumpy man vibes than most of us could pull off. But the liability he's pointing to is the know-it-all elitist thing. Like, he's really naming that David Eby, in contrast to John Horgan, has this baggage, and to the point that he's saying that that Rustad's Conservatives are gonna take the election. Does that seem like an overreach to you, Mike?
Well, I mean, let's get into this polling, I guess. There's one of these cheap and cheerful IVR polls came out yesterday from Liaison, whoever they are. And the IVR polls have the race closer than the online polls. Mm-hmm. And so anyways, some enterprising geographer mapped out these results onto a map of the province and came out with something like 53-41 for the NDP over Conservatives, with BC United erased from the map. Now, that's just a scenario, right? Who cares? It'll change. But I think you have to take things seriously that the Conservatives, with a further change, if there was a further external event that put the wind further at the back of the Conservatives, that we've talked about in previous episodes, there is a pathway for them. Everything has to go perfect. Everything has to fall into place. But there are two things that strike me in the last week or so that are problematic for the Conservatives running the table, going all the way. Actually, three things. One, first of all, is the NDP continue to do well with older voters, and they're the ones most likely to vote. Secondly, where are the Greens? Like, it's not just that their numbers in the polls aren't that great. They're not on the ballot. So they're not going to get any votes in a lot of ridings if they're not on the ballot. And that's a huge problem for a Conservative pathway. And the third thing is that, surprise, surprise, BC United is still alive. And they're actually still nominating candidates. So, and there's one in particular I was just going to flag up in Lauren Dirkson's riding. I think Lauren Dirkson's probably going to win his seat, but the fact that BC United managed to convince a fairly well-known business guy and municipal area director to run as the BC United candidate in Caribou-Chilcotin just shows you that there are still people who are resisting the inexorable pull of the polling numbers towards Conservatives. And so all those things just help the NDP and make it harder for the BC Conservatives to pull off an electoral heist.
Well, I agree with all those points. I was at a charity event in Chinatown for the Chinatown Museum, its first anniversary of opening, and Kevin Falcon was there. There were a lot of politicians there. There were a couple of cabinet ministers. There was some other NDP MLAs, but Kevin Falcon was there working the room like the everybody bunny for, for about 45 minutes. Eleanor Sturko, who used to be a friend of Kevin Falcon, was there, wandered through the room. I don't know that she would have that many connections, frankly, and was soon gone. So the BC United team, although their polling is dismal, are not giving up. They don't have anywhere to go. They just have to fight for their lives. And some of them are experienced fighters. I would say Todd Stone and Shirley Bond and people like that. But to go back to the elitism thing for 1 second, I just think that, to say John Horgan is different from David Eby is so blindingly obvious as to be kind of an empty statement. But what David is someone who people do think gets things done. And, they don't see him in that elitist fashion, in my view. I think they see him as someone who came out of the downtown east side. And for a long time, the view on David Eby was that he was some kind of extreme radical political figure. It's clear that he's not, that he's very much in the mainstream, very practical, and very determined to respond quickly to a challenge. And I think in my unofficial visits with people that don't know that I'm interested in politics, I hear that from people. And his personal approvals are pretty good. So I think voters are seeing him taking that kind of action.
Who in this province would not be aware that you are not involved in politics? Who are these people? What rocks are you pulling over to?
What obscure corners of the province?
I go out sailing with people who know nothing about politics. I wander. I go out and get haircuts. I take taxis.
Exist.
I do take taxis. Yeah.
No,
They should have your photo in marinas to warn people.
Warning:
Okay,
you should be.
okay.
You may be quoted on a podcast. Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
but I want to validate your point, Geoff, to point out that John Horgan and David Eby are different is like glaringly obvious. Sure, fine. But I think what's important is the distinction between them gets at something really important about the recipe for victory for the NDP within BC and sort of the broader, I'd say, shift that's happening within that party federally and provincially about sort of a more kind of labor working class roots and a shifting to a more kind of urban agenda. So it's hard not to contrast them because they are such good proxies for that kind of tension and evolution that is happening within the party.
Well, fair enough, but I don't think I think it's going to be a while before we've sorted out what class means these days and how that plays out electorally, because Mike pointed out that seniors tend to vote more than younger people, but seniors have a different relationship to the economy than young people do. And I think James Moore made a point, partly at my expense, but it's a very sound point when we were talking on that show. He wanted us to timestamp that conversation, because I was talking about why there should be a degree of confidence, although not complacency, among the New Democrats. And he pointed out that these underlying issues that are driving public opinion are reflecting a lot of anger and frustration, which is a challenge for every party. It appears that nobody expects Kevin Falcon to solve those problems, but some of his people are such experienced and longtime representatives of their constituencies that I think they're going to win again. And so it makes it a very interesting challenge to sort out what might happen next.
It does make me wonder if there's going to be these kind of political microclimates that where BC United stays relevant. And I'm thinking of Kamloops, I'm thinking of Prince George, I'm thinking of the Okanagan, where you know, incumbents or even strong candidates, and the party has historically strong organization, and they stay in the game, right? And then it becomes more the primary between them and the Conservatives gets sorted out later than it has been in other places. Now, the Fraser Valley, by contrast, frankly, the BC Liberals / BC United have not had strong organization in the Fraser Valley because they frankly mailed it in year after year because it was so easy to win. And they've never been grassroots, you know, on the grassroots level, been terribly strong in Chilliwack or terribly strong in Abbotsford. And I think the Conservatives are just going to roll over them in the Fraser Valley right now. So I think it depends where you are. Now, I should be listening to myself because normally myself would say, block out the local factors. The provincial narrative is going to steamroller over everything eventually. But I got to see it to believe it in some of these cases.
Well, Mike, I think you've pointed to the Fraser Valley repeatedly, and I certainly agree with that focus as where the election will really be decided in many ways. And those communities are changing at a blistering clip with, you know, suburbs popping up, people moving there so they can afford housing. And that's contributed in part. You've talked to the negative reasons why people may have changed their allegiances at the government level, but also there's new voters out there. More diverse, more with different relationships to the economy, that kind of thing. So it's going to be very interesting to see.
Well,
let's
let
add it. Yeah.
Let me just go one more.
One more.
Surrey.
Yes, I was gonna go there. Totally.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. So you were gonna point to the Greens. Yeah.
Well,
the factor of the Greens, not
so much the Greens in Surrey. The Greens are a factor, as I mentioned earlier. If they're not on the ballot, that probably helps NDP, right?
Right.
And my example in that would be Richmond last election, where there were some missing Greens, and certainly in one riding that should have
Surrey White Rock. Sorry.
Well, Surrey White Rock, you know, the fact that there was a Green helped Trevor Halford get elected. The fact that there wasn't a Green in Richmond, South Centre probably elected the NDP. Now, in Surrey, though, writ large, 10 seats. In the last month or two, Sturco's gone Conservative. Linda Hepner, the former mayor, is running Conservative. Ralston's not running. Baines is not running. That's a pretty big change in Surrey writ large. Conservatives have nominated all 10 candidates in Surrey, and no other party's done that. And I think that's if we're sitting here on October 19th, wondering what the hell just happened with Premier John Rustad getting elected, I think it's because they won like 7 seats in Surrey. And that's one I'll be watching specifically.
Well, the other thing to pick up on, I know you'd mentioned, Mike, like there's still a bunch of ridings where there's a Conservative candidate running and no BC United candidate. There's still a significant number that reverse. Like how this splits riding by riding between the Conservatives and BC United is like impossible to know. Sorry, and let me add on the layer too. I love the latest fundraising dollars, right? With BC United slipping to BC United in the last quarter, raising less than the NDP did in one day. But overall, they're still way ahead of the Conservatives, right?
No, they're not. They're not.
Oh, they're not.
The Conservatives are ahead of BC United now in the last quarter.
Cumulatively in the last quarter.
Yeah,
oh, wow.
It was 2.2 for NDP, 1.1 for Conservative, and I think 630 for BC United. Yeah,
but I mean after, because like cumulatively the BC United was raising more like north of $1 million, right, until recently, and now they plummeted. Versus the Conservatives were raising nothing. So like, what's the war chest?
The Conservatives are still half what the NDP are, but the Conservatives are on the rise, right?
Yeah.
So, and the BC United's going the other way.
Yeah.
But back to your point about where there's not a vote split right now. In my very rough estimation, based on the Wikipedia page for the election, so
Sound science.
asterisks. Be careful to quote this, or not. There's 26 ridings, I estimate, where there's a Conservative and no BC United. There's 13 where there's a BC United and no Conservative, and there's 9 where there are neither. So that's 48 seats where there's currently no vote split, and there's a lot of those seats are what I would call winnable seats. I'd say maybe call it 15 or 20. So that's not an insignificant number, and I think this number will dwindle as we get closer to the writ, but I'm just throwing it out there to say, geez, these guys still have some flexibility. If they actually were going to get at some kind of arrangement, and I know it's probably over and people are going to laugh that I even bring it up. But when you look at the math, it's actually, if they just stopped and put on the Flintstone brakes right now, they'd actually probably save 5 or 10 seats. So put it out there, universe.
Interesting point.
Yeah.
Probably purely academic and pointless.
Well, I do think there are a lot of questions that you're more qualified to answer than I am, for sure, Mike, but about the readiness of these teams at the ground level, which is still not irrelevant, depending on the money they have, the morale of the organization, the capacity of the technical teams in the back shop, all that kind of stuff, where BC United expected to hold the high ground, and now we see money heading towards the Conservatives. So it'll be very interesting to see, but the Conservatives will obviously lack a lot of ground organization, and maybe BC United will as well. Organizations said an evolving target in the NDP as well, because of the emerging importance of technology and social media, and get out the vote and voter information and all that kind of thing. So there's a lot of uncharted territory here, I think.
We haven't really seen the beginning of the negative advertising yet either, the true beginning of it. So a really awesome advertising strategy relative to your opponent's strategy sucking could make a big difference either way, right?
Well, my understanding is that people tell me that when they listen to focus groups and so on, of course, people are generally aware of who David Eby is. And a significant number are aware of who Kevin Falcon is. But there are a lot of people who are still not sure who John Rustad is. And that could be an asset, or it could be a vulnerability in the face of a good negative campaign. We'll just have to watch.
All right. With that, let's go grab a drink.
I want to get personal and share my family's energy story. Black thermal coal. Over a century ago, my grandmother's family mined it under the Atlantic seabed off of Glace Bay, Nova Scotia. Some moved west to apply their skills to underground mining in Drumheller. That's where my grandparents met. There were dozens of coal mines in the Badlands, and my grandfather had the high-grade mine and the Rose Deer mine. Coal was how millions of Canadians heated their homes for generations. And when my mother was growing up in Vancouver, her home was heated by sawdust. Vancouver would have smog thicker than pea soup in the 1940s because of sawdust burning in households across the region. When I was a kid, our home in Haney, find that on a map, was heated by oil. The big oil truck used to come to our house to fill up our massive oil tank. When I was a high school kid, the gas network was extended to my neighborhood and our heating became a lot cleaner. Today, I lean on both gas and electricity for home heating. Fortis BC also has deep roots when it comes to energy in our communities. Their first hydroelectric dam was built near Nelson in 1897, and Fortis BC's Tilbury LNG facility has been safely operating in Delta for more than 50 years, storing energy for when our province needs it most. Today, gas infrastructure connects over 1 million homes and businesses throughout BC. And like the shift from coal to heating oil to natural gas, our province's energy system continues to change. Fortis BC is reducing greenhouse gas emissions by transitioning away from delivering conventional natural gas to delivering renewable and low-carbon gas. Gas, along with electricity, is an integral part of a diversified energy system. Thanks to Fortis BC for letting me share my family's energy story. What's yours? Fortis BC. Energy for a better future and a better podcast.
Let's raise a glass or take a shot. Time to raid the minibar.
I'll just do a toast today to Bob Williams. I talked about him a bit, and of course, Bob Williams was acerbic and could be caustic and was a terrifying opponent in question period and so on. But what I think I appreciated about Bob the most was that he was a brilliant guy who insisted on driving ideas forward, and he hated entitlement and pomposity and privilege. And his background made him just a misery to anybody who seemed to come from that direction. And although he didn't always hit the right target, I just think that's an important side of him, because at the time when the Barrett government got elected, the first NDP government in the history of the province, there were a lot of skeptics, and he demonstrated that there were competent and excellent managers and very good strategic thinkers on the front bench of the Barrett government. And he continued to do that later in his life in other fields. So a toast to Bob Williams.
Indeed. I appreciate the fact I'm going to channel my Glenn Clark here.
Ding, 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 ding.
I'm going to appreciate the fact that he got into power in 72 and from his perspective made the most of it, right? And I think and Glenn had talked about Brian Mulroney in that vein, where it's like, you got the reins of the office, go for it, right? So he certainly, I think, embodied that. I've got, I'm going to go on a bit of a bender here. I've got a whole raft of them today. I'll start with a shot. It's at the federal Greens, Elizabeth May and her co-leader. Her co-leader has stepped back from the role. First of all, co-leaders, like, how lame is that? But the other guy, no one's ever heard of this guy, insert name of co-leader here, has stepped away, leaving Elizabeth May with all the power now as leader of the Greens. It reminds me of a saying that has governed me in politics: the smaller the stakes, the more vicious the infighting. These Greens are just so consumed by their own internal machinations, both federally and provincially. It's just like, just grow up and be a normal political party one of these days, please. Anyways, that's my shot. A few glasses. First of all, quick one. James Moore, thanks for pinch hitting last week. James, you did a great job as usual, and we hope to have you back again soon. Rob Shaw wrote a piece on the UK election and how they report election results.
Yeah.
And how boring we are here, where everyone just refreshes the web browsers to get the results, whereas in the UK, they're manually counting them. Well, we do that here too, but they announce them in a sequential way, and all the candidates come to one hall and they wear ribbons, and we should do that in Canada.
No, we shouldn't. Come on. It's so...
Wouldn't you rather have a 12-hour election broadcast? I would.
What about the people in funny costumes and crazy names?
Yeah,
we don't have those either.
The monster raving loony party. Absolutely, let's bring it on. Thanks, Rob, for surfacing that. I believe Jeff Ferrier had something to do with that. So thanks, Jeff. And finally, raise glass to someone who was well known in the Campbell years and Christy Clark years as a staff member in various ministers' offices, Don Smukowicz. He's dealing with some health issues, and Don, just thinking of you, and all the best.
Amazing. I was wondering whether you'd agree with that, with Rob's take, but okay. I'll be quick because I just want to raise my glass. I want to raise my glass to the Canadian men's soccer team. We've got to wrap this episode so we can go watch this puppy. I just wanted to mention Alphonso Davies played for the Whitecaps, came to Vancouver via Edmonton from a refugee camp in Ghana, but Vancouver's own there in Alphonso Davies, who's the captain of the team. And I wish them all the best tonight in their game.
Awesome.
All right. On that happy, excited note, we will wrap another episode of Hotel Pacifico. I want to thank our guest, Denise O'Connor, for joining us today. And I want to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and Fortis BC. We will see you next week, folks. BC, you can never leave.
Checkout time at Hotel Pacifico. We hope you enjoyed your stay.